Okay, before I start my talk, I have a parenthetical to say, so it doesn't count as part of my talk or against my time. So my talk has not begun. I'm speaking within ellipses. And within those ellipses, I want to congratulate my co-panelists for their existential courage in presenting here today. Because if I'm teaching Godard's intentionality, and I'm talking about why Godard made a certain cut, I can say that with a fair degree of certainty that old Jean-Luc's not going to amble through the door and tell me I'm dead wrong. But to express these opinions with the artist sitting right here takes a certain amount of guts, because what if I give you my most cherished perception and I look over and Tom's going, what am I going to do? Okay, now I'll start my talk. And I also want to thank Adam for setting up the rant format, because mine's a bit ranty also. I want to dedicate my presentation to Lou Reed, because my life was saved by rock and roll and Otis Redding. And after my life was saved by rock and roll, my life was made worth living by the great rock and roll writers who told me what Lou said was the most important thing that art could communicate, which is that I was not alone. They heard the way I heard, they heard more than I heard, and told me what I was missing. They felt what I felt. And even more importantly than that, they were as demanding and cranky and as unreasonable as I was about the music. And the reason that we were all so unreasonable and demanding and cranky was that this music provided salvation. And if there is no middle ground in rock and roll, and there is no middle ground in rock and roll, then if the music isn't salvation, then it's perdition. And if the music is perdition, then there has to be a devil involved. And in this case, the devil is mediocrity. And if the devil's mediocrity, then clearly it's the devil from Conrad, the flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of a rapacious and pitiless folly. Because that's what shite popular music is. Really, 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 really shitty, really, 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 really popular music, like the Eagles, is a rapacious and pitiless folly. Now, I've never heard of Camden Joy. I've never read a word of him, I'm embarrassed to say, until I was invited to be in this panel. And then I read every word in a big lump, and one of your publishers in Portland sent me the books that are out of print. So I read everything, and it was a revelation. And as befits a revelation, it cracked the sky. It remade the world. Film, literature, poetry, the arts, architecture, dance, they can all crack the sky. But for some reason, the thunderbolts from music seem the most thunderbolty. And I think that the most appropriate example I can give from my own life, we all have ours, is that moment when the cool junior, and we all knew a cool junior, put the stylus on the record right before Heroin. And he wouldn't tell me the name of the band, and he wouldn't tell me the name of the song, but even worse, he wouldn't give me the album jacket. How am I supposed to digest this song if I don't hold the album jacket while it's playing? And so, is there a silence as pregnant and laden, as delicious as the moment when you put the needle on the record, you put the needle on the record, you put the needle on the record, and you miss the song before it, and you don't scratch, and it's just there. And you're just waiting for whatever comes next. There's no silence like it. So, no pun intended, but the universe prior to Heroin bore absolutely no resemblance to the universe after Heroin. And when the sky cracks open, it's not so much a time for rational disquisition, but just you start searching for references and context to somehow make sense and connect to this universe in which you find yourself. And so my presentation may be a little disjointed because I'm just going to take you through what occurred to me when joy cracked the sky. The three artists whose work joy most strongly evoked for me, in no particular order, are Lowell George, Charles Portis, and Rudy Wurlitzer. Lowell George is the singer, songwriter, producer, harmonica genius, and slide guitar avatar who died early of a drug-related heart attack, and his band was Little Feat. And if all you know of Little Feat is like the Little Feat of this century, the kind of pathetic boogie band, then I would urge you to go to what Joy cites in Liz Phair as that rarest thing, 2 perfect albums, Little Feat's first 2 records, Little Feat and Sailing Shoes. Charles Portis wrote, I think the book you might know best is True Grit, and Dog of the South, and Gringos, which I'll heartily recommend all of them. And Rudy Wurlitzer, how do you describe Rudy Wurlitzer? He's a post-acid test, deadpan, zen, streetwise, neorealist absurdist. And he's the author of the books Mog and most recently Drop Edge of Yonder. But more importantly, he is the definitive road movie screenwriter. He wrote Candy Mountain, which he co-directed with the photographer Robert Frank, and which Joe Strummer and David Johansen have parts. And he wrote Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which is the most road movie of Westerns, and that's really saying something. And he wrote the movie that is tied for first place as the single greatest road movie ever, which is where my title comes from, and if you have time afterwards, I'll tell you about the title because it pertains, and that is Two Lane Blacktop. Now, the great thing about Stanley Kubrick is Stanley has a quote for every occasion. If you need a good quote, Stanley is like, he's front and center. And Stanley Kubrick says, as pertains to these artists of joy, that truth and multifaceted ideas seldom yield themselves to frontal assault. Something we all know, but Stanley said it very well, I think. And what Joy shares with these other artists for me is that the shortest distance between, as Lou Reed said, thought and expression, and the shortest distance between creative form and creative intent is a parabola. That these artists are so interested in avoiding even the tiniest glimmer of frontal assault that it really takes a while to work through all this obliqueness. And he also shares with them that he's so demanding and unreasonable and cranky, first of himself as an artist, and then of his audience, that his art, like these other artists, is designed to find only the most discerning artist, hence your student. And his work, like theirs, even in all its greatness, functions more as a filter than a lure. Now that's a very interesting artistic position. Now someone said, appropriately enough, a sports writer, whose name I can't remember, said of Lowell George that he writes parodies of truck stop songs that are the most moving truck stop songs you've ever heard. Now, any country songwriter will tell you that a truck stop song is already a parody. That a truck stop song is a collection of genre conventions turned up to 11. So who seeks to write heartbreaking parodies of parodies? What kind of triple refined sensibility, what kind of distance-determined refusenik goes that far to avoid frontal assault? Well, the answer is Camden, Georgia. And this whole idea evokes Ken Joy's, for me, staggeringly perfect summation of Exile in Guyville in the Liz Phair book, which I took as a book seemingly dedicated to the proposition that rock criticism is absolutely irrelevant to the demographic who embraces rock most passionately. And then right in the middle of it, here's this unbelievable take on Liz Phair. So we all write the only way we can. I mean, we all know that. We're stuck with writing the way we write. God help us. But what fuels the creation to write like this, under this level of rigor and discernment and refusal, and to produce so beautifully? Well, it brings to mind my single favorite line from Kingsley Amis, who said, "The reason why Prometheus couldn't get away from the vulture was that he was keen on it and not the other way around." And these are authors who are all quite keen on their vultures. And the four of them also are united in being way too funny, and especially way too smart for their own good. God, they're too smart for their own good. And this evokes an amazing paragraph, parallel to Joy's paragraph in A Rant, from Elizabeth Bowen's novel, Eva Trout. Right in the middle of Eva Trout, like a landmine, is a paragraph that is the most astonishing, complete, inspiring, critical overview of Dickens you've ever seen. All you need to know for a lifetime in one paragraph. 10,000 theses in one paragraph. It perfectly marries Joy's take on Phair. And you can read more about Joy if you like, and you can read more about Dickens if you like, but you don't have to. And they trigger, in their compressive brilliance, Isaac Babel, who has such a gift for every time he writes one sentence, 10 appear in your head. And these paragraphs share that. Now, was it Coco Chanel, or was it Fred Astaire who said, elegance is refusal? And when you get this kind of concision, of course you're operating on such an infinite level of refusal, but even more than concision, this is about compression. This is about Superman squeezing a diamond in his hand, a lump of coal in his hand so hard that it becomes a diamond. And that's what these paragraphs do. Now, back to being too smart for your own good. Bowen has, her character concludes this paragraph by telling us that the foremost salient defining quality of Dickens is intelligence. But in the last sentence of the paragraph, she says, and of course, the foremost salient, dominant, defining quality of intelligence is uselessness. Okay. In the back of my Graham Parsons novel, I put an encyclopedia, really short entries about every band and every musician that appeared in the novel. And my thinking was that, I'm going to give you, I might pat myself on the back, I'm going to give you a parenthetical I heard last night, which goes to a couple of points that y'all raised. A friend of mine was in Nashville for a job last night. She emailed me and said that my Graham Parsons book is on sale in the Ernest Tubb Music Store in Nashville. Now, for someone with my background and outlook and upbringing to have his work end up in the Ernest Tubb Music Store, ain't that America? I mean, you can't trace the genealogy of that product anyway. So I've got all these dictionary entries in the back, and my thinking was, 15 years from now, some 15-year-old is going to pick the tattered remains of my book out of some smoldering dung heap. And I wanted that 15-year-old to have some short way of knowing that he or she should run home that minute and start listening to Ernest Tubb and Patsy Cline and James Booker and Doug Somm. Now, I have an entry in there on the Eagles, and in its entirety, I should say, because I was preaching salvation, right? But I also had to steer this 15-year-old away from perdition as well. So my entry on the Eagles reads in its entirety, the worst iconic band in American rock, in fact, much worse than that. And, believe me, I went around like this, I'm an Eagle hater. Nobody hates up on the Eagles like me. But, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades in joy, I am a rank amateur when it comes to Eagle hatred. And Palm 13 is the ideal of Eagle hatred. It's such fine, burning, cleaning hate. It's so brilliant. It's the flaming sword. It's like mainlining Clorox. And it's a righteous hate against a righteous enemy, presented paradoxically with such elegance and subtlety and finesse. And it's hard to think of someone who hates with that level of clarity and accuracy and proves so willing to invest the time and energy and creative resource and aesthetic discipline in this exquisite, wholly deserved fuck you. Now, it's also, for me, the essence of a comedy of manners. I may have the definition wrong. I'm the most undereducated person in this room, I guarantee you, but to me, the comedy of manners is when the description of the accurate behavior is so correct that the innate absurdity and hatefulness of it just rises up to the surface. So one has to ask the question, who can hate like this? In what company does Joy find himself? Well, Bukowski comes to mind, but Bukowski's the kind of hater who comes up and says, I hate you, and punches you in the nose. So that's not exactly right. What you want is this brilliant, oblique documentary hatred. So, I have a little list here. Didion, back in the day, could really, really hate. I just finished again The Last Thing He Wanted, and boy, where that book is good. The hate in it is so fine. Kingsley Amis, is one of the great haters of all time. Patricia Highsmith could really get her hate on. Celine Janae Burroughs, sure, haters. Isaac Valley, one of my favorite haters. Dorothy Parker, naturally. And then we go from the all-star haters to the Hall of Fame haters. Mark Twain, of course, he's the king of this kind of hate. Swift's a stellar hater, Voltaire too. But his articulate, charming, oblique, polite evisceration, for me, most strongly evokes Diderot's Rameau's Nephew, which is one of the wittiest, most bitter pieces of social satire I've ever come across. And Diderot's fate really parallels Joy at having been too smart for his own good, and the proof of intelligence is uselessness. Just for instance, in Wikipedia, it says of Diderot, though his work was broad and rigorous, it did not bring Diderot riches. How many of us want that for our epitaph? Zero. But I think for real hate, for true hate, for this kind of sophistication in hate, you have to come to Alexander Pope. Now, Alexander Pope translated the Iliad and the Odyssey into rhyming couplets. 15,000 rhyming couplets. And I would have brought one of the volumes and read you a couplet or two, but my bag would have been over the weight limit. I'd take all my clothes out of the bag just to bring 15,000 rhyming couplets. Who could bear to do that? Who could bear to take on the task and then read it and then reread it again? Only somebody so in love with his vulture. So when I started reading it, I knew there had to be a gag. I kept thinking, what's the joke here? Because especially, nobody, not even Alexander Pope, turns out 15,000 erudite, graceful, rhyming couplets without an implicit or explicit fuck you. And I had to read about 10,000 of them before I got the point. Now, I love Robert Pinsky's translations of Homer. I read them more than anybody else's. And with Greil Marcus's Mystery Train, if you read it young enough, it really will crack the sky. It will show you how much metaphor and thematic richness American music can bear. And it's hard to remember what a groundbreaking book it was because it launched an industry of books that tried to be like it. And yet I would say that Pinsky and Marcus are the absolute anodynes of Pope and Joy. And when you read Pinsky's translations or Marcus's Mystery Train, they never let you forget these majestic mysteries and how you collude with them in recognizing these mysteries that elude all the lesser souls except you. So you go to read Pinsky and Marcus, and they help you on with your velvet smoking jacket, and they put you down in the brocade armchair, they pull up the embroidered footstool, they give you your velvet slippers, they light a fire in the grate, they give you your snifter of brandy, and as you read, they're always patting you on the shoulder and they're saying, you and you alone are sufficiently perceptive, sophisticated, profound, and open enough to comprehend the grander scale, immortality, and tragedy of these great works. As you're warming your brandy, you hear this tapping, you hear this rapping on the leaded windows, and suddenly you realize that Pope and Joy are out there in the freezing dark and rain. And as soon as you realize that they magically appear beside you, and as Marcus and Pinsky are talking in this year, Pope and Joy are in this one dancing around, and they're saying to you, hey, it's only a nursery rhyme.